Please support the channel with the link directly below that allows me to be able to provide you this information. If you like the charts, you like the indicators, let me know that by supporting the channel today. If you could take a moment to do that, I would really appreciate it. Just follow the link below to take you to a secured site, and you can donate any amount you want or make it a recurring donation. And I thank you for your consideration for that. The S&P 500, again, continues to have bearish momentum. Right after we got that failed breakout, we got the reversal of conditions. Momentum has been bearish. We've been holding below the 10-period moving average. The red line, bars have been red, the cloud have been red. We saw the support levels with the trend line break. We saw the horizontal January low break, and now we've seen horizontal support going back to the July peak breaking. And again, it's not confirmed. We've got the shot at the Morningstar reversal if we get a rally back up with the CPI tomorrow, or again, maybe there's some good positive, more positive tariff news. We got good positive tariff news today with the tariffs on Canada with steel and aluminum now being delayed as Canada back to the negotiating table. I'll be watching to see if we get a green bar on the awesome oscillator, and if we do, can we get back above that 200 period? Do we come back and fill this gap? Can we come back up here and eventually try to claw our way back above the 10-period moving average? And again, I'll be talking about later in the video the Fibonacci retracements, the 50-period, the Ichimoku cloud, and all the other areas where, again, we could be rallying towards. But we're probably about to experience a big rally. Bitcoin's already doing it. The market is likely going to follow Bitcoin's lead. It followed Bitcoin down to the 200-period moving average. If Bitcoin gets back above it and starts to rally big time, the S&P and the NASDAQ will likely follow Bitcoin. Similarities between the S&P and NASDAQ with Bitcoin. And candle of indecision here on the NASDAQ. We got a doji, we got a spinning top in the S&P. We'll be watching, do we get any green awesome oscillator bars? And if we do, can we close back above these 200-period moving averages, get back above our 10-period moving averages? Again, right after our failed breakout from the December high over here with our peak in February, we had a failed breakout and we got that reversal momentum, and momentum has been bearish ever since. To be able to get back above the 10-period moving average, you got to be able to flip the cloud. You got to flip the bars back to blue if we're going to get a recovery, and you got to be able to flip the cloud back to green. NASDAQ daily chart here. Now, yesterday, the S&P 500 broke horizontal support, and I told you that if we have a legitimate break of this area, like the trend line, you've got to get confirmation of that, and then it's got to have a fall through, but you got to get that confirmation. And closing below yesterday's low, and right here we didn't do that. We had an intraday push below it, but we couldn't confirm that break of horizontal support, the support area from the highs back over here, the lows in here that we had in October and November. Again, we could not confirm a break of that level. So if we try to rally back up and we get above that level, then this is just a flush out move. Bitcoin is rallying big time. It's been up as high over 6% today. The trend line of support. NASDAQ's doing the same thing. It's testing the trend line of support. The S&P 500, NASDAQ are testing their 50-week moving averages. So is Bitcoin. Bitcoin is leading the charge. And we're getting all kinds of bullish divergences and reversal signals with Bitcoin, and the S&P 500 is now likely going to follow suit. To be watching if we get back above horizontal support, now turned resistance. If we get back above this area, back above the 200 period, be watching the 50 period and this broken trend line right here. We'll also be looking at our Fibonacci retracements. The risk is the market peaked. S&P's now dropped 10%. Believe it or not, there's still the possibility of new highs. So we'll be watching. Do we get more volatility surrounding the tariffs? We got more tariffs coming into play tomorrow, but more good tariff news today, and that's what created the bottom off of the lows. Plus, we got that news. I've been warning you about the news. Last week I talked about it, that Ukraine's eventually going to come to the negotiating table. That story broke today, and that helped the market as well in hopes of peace between Russia and Ukraine. Peace agreement. So again, candle of indecision. We got a spinning top candlestick, a candle of indecision just below horizontal support, and the NASDAQ broke just below rising support. Now, the Dow is down much lower at the lows of the session. The Dow down 478 points, down 1.14%. The S&P down 0.75%. Close at 55.72. NASDAQ down 0.18%, just down a little bit. It had rallied along with Tesla. The Russell up 0.25%, and the VIX was down 3.37%. Now, the VIX is predicting a rally tomorrow, a bounce or a bottom. Had two other signals on the VIX. They both have played out, but only have given us bounces. Again, the VIX was up. VIX was up yesterday by 19.21%. It was up above 26% at the highs. We were down today, as I've said, but the VIX is predicting that the S&P in the next two trading sessions, which was one today, one tomorrow, the S&P will rally. Now, tomorrow we're going to get the CPI data. Inflation is supposed to come in cooler. Wouldn't be surprised to see a rebound in the S&P starting to follow Bitcoin's lead now. Candle of indecision today on the S&P could mark a turning point if we don't get confirmation of the break of horizontal support. But we were up 19.21%. There's an 85% chance tomorrow will be an up day, 85% chance that it will be an update, 15% chance that it's not, based on the VIX. Now, again, the last two signals on the VIX were correct. It only gave the S&Ps a couple of bounces. A signal, again, predicting that we're going to either get a bounce or bottom. So we'll see if we get that rally tomorrow, if we have an update. But the VIX is predicting that will happen. Don't know whether it will be a bounce or a bottom, but there's an 85% chance we're going to have an update tomorrow. So we're probably going to see a rally with the CPI data. See what happens with Trump's steel and aluminum tariffs. We got good tariff news today. Trump's got the most of the tariffs on Canada and Mexico, got those paused yet again. Anything that was covered under the trade agreement from his first administration, so were paused. Also, Trump doing some walking back some of the tariffs there. We get Canada imposing a 25% surcharge on electricity from Ontario going to the U.S., and Trump responds by adding another 25% tariff to Canada steel and aluminum, calling their bluff. I mean, this was complete foolishness on their part, in the fact that, I mean, 77% of Canada's exports go into the United States. So they think they're gonna the U.S. exports to Canada are very, very small. So who needs who? It needs the United States to survive, and they're trying to, the leader, the Ontario Premier, Doug Ford, caves immediately, now suspending the 25% surcharge on electricity exported to the United States. Trump doubles the tariffs to 50% for Canada, gives them a reality check, and brings them to the negotiating table. And this is what I keep saying. Again, the media is doing their absolute best to convince us we're in a trade war. And again, got a little bit going on with China, and now the retaliatory tariffs and so forth. But the other stuff going on has either been paused or delayed. Have the European tariffs yet set for April 2nd? There might be other things. Now Trump doing this is now bringing Canada to the negotiating table. We've seen pretty much the same thing with Mexico. And the media is trying to convince us we're in this trade war, which really we're not yet in it. It cracks me up because, again, we're being told high tariffs in Europe, the high tariffs in Canada and other countries, that's not going to put us into recession, and that's not bad. And those tariffs, they don't cause inflation. But the United States, if they do it, we're all going to go into recession, and those tariffs, those cause inflation. You see the absurdity? Tariffs cause inflation. Europe would have hyperinflation right now. A bunch of nonsense, okay? But I keep saying it again. I'm not a fan of Trump's tariffs. I'm not a fan. You know what I hate more than Trump's tariffs? I hate Europe's tariffs and Canada's tariffs because they're much higher than Trump's tariffs. Trump's bringing reciprocal tariffs, which means he's leveling the playing field with Europe and other countries. European Union and other countries. the countries and the European Union and of the world, if these countries would just stop all these tariffs, the United States would remove all their tariffs. They're just trying to level the playing field. Not a fan of anybody's tariffs because I believe in free trade. They have tariffs on U.S. Agriculture and dairy. It's at hundreds of percent, 200-300% tariffs. They feign outrage, and they're telling us, oh, the tariffs Trump's doing is going to cause a recession. Well, but their tariffs don't cause recession. And their tariffs are worse than Trump's. You see what I'm saying? The logic now. Again, how do we know that Trump's tariffs aren't going to bring people like Canada now back at the negotiating table and we end up seeing these tariffs removed, which would be just a beautiful thing. Because that would open markets and create free trade. Continue to tell you the tariffs are going to end up, they're already being blamed for inflation, which again, we keep seeing them paused or postponed, being blamed for the economy, which again, we got the first tariffs February 1st, and they lasted a day and a half, 2 days. Another tariffs, and they keep being paused. Now we're going to get possibly the steel, aluminum tariffs, but Trump is saying now going to cave to back at the negotiating table. He's not going to impose a 50% tariff on Canadian steel and aluminum starting tomorrow. Canada has agreed to come back to the negotiating table, which is what the United States wanted. The tariffs continue to move the market, so I'm not trying to bore you with it, but I'm just trying to tell you, look, we're going to hate Trump's tariffs, we should hate Europe's tariffs, we should hate Canada's tariffs, and every other country that does this. Have these countries trying to justify, well, we got to protect the farmers. Well, when if we said that about the U.S. farmers? Hopefully, some of these countries will come to their senses because, again, I don't like any tariffs, and I think they're bad for the global economy. Well, Canada comes back to the negotiating table on trade, not imposing 50% tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum. I don't see anything yet about the tariffs that are supposed to go into place tomorrow on all countries. All countries, steel and aluminum tariffs. This is what we had in 2018. And I wouldn't be surprised to see another delay or Trump walk it back somehow, reducing it, postponing it, market just shrug it off, and we get the CPI coming in cooler. I think the CPI is going to come in cool, and it's expected to, and I think that will give us a rally. Does Trump end up delaying the steel and aluminum tariffs? Something happened, but Bitcoin's rallying big time, and the S&P is probably going to follow suit. Usually follows Bitcoin's lead. Again, tomorrow we're supposed to get the CPI inflation, and if it comes in cool after the last month's report coming in hot, could see the markets try to rally surrounding that. Oh, that we're not going to get inflation after all. Some kind of relief rally. If it comes in hot, then we could have more volatility and maybe confirm the breakdown, but of horizontal support in the S&P and the breakdown of rising support on the NASDAQ we'll be watching. Right now, we're trying to rebound. Both Bitcoin and the NASDAQ are trying to bounce off the trend lines and the 50-week moving averages. Again, supposed to come in at 0.3% tomorrow morning before the market opens. Month-over-month basis, 0.3%. Same thing with the core. The year-over-year, 2.9 is supposed to be lower than the 3% with the CPI, so it's supposed to tick back down. And the core is supposed to drop down to 3.2, down from 3.3 the previous reading. So if that happens, you can see a massive relief rally tomorrow with the inflation data, and I think that's very, very possible because of the bullish divergences on the 60-minute charts. Bitcoin's 4-hour chart is almost equivalent to those 60-minute charts, and we're already seeing now those bullish divergences begin to play out with Bitcoin, and the stock market is likely going to follow Bitcoin's lead. Follow Bitcoin down to the 200 period. Lost my voice here for a second. It followed Bitcoin down to the 200 period moving average for a test, and NASDAQ down to the trend lines. Major trend lines. It's likely if Bitcoin can recover that it will follow. I'm getting a boatload of bullish signals on a Bitcoin that it formed that first bottom and now it has a potential double bottom pattern. got all kinds of bullish signals, and it's rallying up about 6% at the highs of the session, at least so far. See if the S&P follows suit. We got the producer price index the next day on Thursday. Next week, we'll get Powell and the Fed. They are expected to pause. Now, there are 3 rate cuts penciled in with Fed fund futures. Remember, we're going to get the projections out of the Fed next week. Where the economic projections and where do they think that rates are going in 2025 and 2026. And remember, from the September meeting to the December meeting, they downsized the amount of rate cuts from 4 to 2, and the market did not like that. We'll get, the dot plot, and we'll see where the Fed is at. Are expected to pause next week, and again, making another monetary policy mistake, as they always do right before every single recession. That's what you do when you're blindsided by Keynesian economics. That's what the Fed follows. They are Keynesians over there. We continue to have the S&P with this multiple point bullish divergence. It formed as we were testing the 200 period, and now we've dropped below it, and we now have multiple point bullish divergence. This is what led to the January bottom back over here. And again, these divergences in the 60-minute time frame have led to printing points over and over again. And again, we have this falling channel, okay? And again, we don't get confirmation with the close below Monday's bar, talked about earlier. Then again, if we push back up of the horizontal support that now broke, you just got a flush out move. You got a fake out. You can try to rally back up towards the 200 period moving average, towards Fibonacci retracements, towards cloud in the daily time frame. Remember, I told you NVIDIA is trying to bounce surrounding this trend line right here. Bitcoin is doing the same thing on a trend line, going down like that, and a rising trend line. So again, you got a pretty good shot. You're going to try to get a rebound with NVIDIA and with Bitcoin. And if they do, NVIDIA trying to help the NASDAQ, Bitcoin leading the market, you can see a recovery, and then we'll be watching. Now again, I continue to believe that NVIDIA's peaked. The jury, I think, is still out on the S&P and the NASDAQ. Pardon me, not the NASDAQ, the S&P 500 and Bitcoin. NVIDIA's peaked. You got a pretty good shot that NASDAQ has probably peaked. Again, this channel, we moved up to it here to fill the gap. Now we've come back to it here to our lows here in the last 2 trading sessions. If S&P is going to rebound, as I showed you the 60-minute chart, those bullish divergences, we got to be able to get back above the 200. We've been struggling to do that. Here's our gap we had from yesterday, watching to see if we try to fill that gap, and then do we try to recover and follow Bitcoin? If the rally can continue, do we get a CPI rally? I think you got a good shot that that's going to be the case. A relief rally, that inflation, if it goes back down, that inflation is cooling. Then, as I keep saying, I think the report is going to go higher, just like it did in 2007 and 8. I think that will eventually lead to an inflation freakout, and the tariffs and all the rest of it. This could be a preview of coming attractions. Unless we start dropping and we get the inflation data now, then the Fed will panic. I think that we're going to get the Fed meeting next week. I think they're probably still going to pause. There might be a glimmer of hope with the possibly more cuts on the horizon for 2025. We'll see what happens. But right now, you got about 2 for sure hopes, and then you got one less than 30% for a third one, but it changes every single day. You got to remember, the herd believes that the rate cuts are bullish, the rate cuts are bearish. Fed's going to be doing that because of the coming recession that they're telling us is not going to happen. Got to get above that 200 period. We can see that happen. We can rally towards the clouds. We can rally on the S&P and NASDAQ. We can rally towards our Fibonacci retracements. If we can claw our way back above the 200 period moving average, Bitcoin has rallied back up to it, testing it. We could see a massive rally on the S&P if we attempt to do that. You got a possible Morningstar reversal here. Morningstar reversal, you got a wide range bar followed by a spinning top looking kind of candlestick. If we get another wide range bar that comes back to fill the gap down from Monday, there, if you come back down right there, whoops, wrong one, right there, the close. If we come back to try to fill this gap down, then you could get a wide range bar. If we start moving towards that gap fill, you don't have to fill it, but if we move towards it and the 200 period, which Bitcoin is doing right now, we'll see what happens by Bitcoin's close. And if it continues to rally, does Bitcoin rally with the CPI tomorrow? Does the stock market start following Bitcoin? I want to be watching the cloud up here. This is the Ichimoku cloud, our trending cloud, and our 50 period moving average, a green line right there. So again, we'll be looking at this. You have a bearish alignment of the moving averages now. So the risk is that you rally back up and you stall, but you're going to get a big rally. The question comes, is that a peak? And you have to remember, at the 2007 top, we had a big sell-off. I think it was about 12 or 13%, but then we rallied up and we made new highs. Now 10%. I'll be watching the moving averages. I'll be watching the cloud. I'll be watching the Fibonacci retracements, and I'll be watching, do we get a lower high, or do we come up here, still try to rally? Could get good tariff news if we see the tariffs paused yet again, still in aluminum, and now we're seeing, again, most of the tariffs on Canada and Mexico paused yet again. Recently, we got that news. Those products that fall under the previous trade agreement. In the cloud here, let's take a look at the Fibonacci's in just a second, but I just want to show you again the NASDAQ chart is doing the same thing the S&P is. Again, the gap lower, the divergence, multiple point divergence here. This is what gave us that January bottom. If we can get a rally back up, 200 period, and then we'll be watching these broken trend lines in the daily time frame in here, filling the gaps on both the S&P and the NASDAQ back over here from the Fed pivot. We're filling the gap, but we get a doji. We got a spinning top on the S&P. We get a doji on NASDAQ, and if that marks a bottom, could we see a Morningstar reversal here as well? You have a wide range bar followed by a doji. If you get a wide range bar upward tomorrow, then you've got a Morningstar reversal pattern, a 3-day reversal pattern, same as the S&P 500. Again, then we'll be watching the 50 period, the cloud up here. We'll be watching all of this to see what happens. If we rally back up, we'll be watching to see if we stop making new highs. The failed breakout that I talked about on February 19th did play out in producing a sell-off. But the support levels, I talked about the gap here at the election gap and the gap over here, but we've gone well beyond, and I talked about the 200 period if we ended up getting a bigger sell-off, but we've gone well beyond the 200 period, far lower than I thought we would go. But again, so we'll be watching. That could be a signal. Be watching the Fed and all this. Do they pause? Do they end up stopping quantitative tightening? I think they're going to stop quantitative tightening, and I think they could do that next week, because eventually that's going to stop. That's a reverse of QE. They're unwinding their balance sheet. I think that's going to stop. Is also one of the things that is putting pressure on everything. Stop quantitative tightening, the markets could rally on that as well. And if they stop quantitative tightening, what's the market going to be thinking? Oh, the next thing we're going to get QE. The market is addicted to that. So again, these clouds, the moving averages, we'll be watching. And here we are at our gap, fill the Fed pivot gap, and these failed breakouts so far. NASDAQ and S&P moved to new highs in February. It could be with the next rally that they end up still diverging. That happens sometimes. We'll be watching that. Don't rule out that the S&P doesn't move to new highs. It still can. Could just be a preview of coming attractions. I told you we may sell off at the beginning of the week and end up having a big rally by the end of the week. And these candles of indecision possibly could be in play. Now, sticks mean absolutely nothing. We had a candle of indecision previously up to 200. Candles of indecision mean nothing unless they confirm and get a follow-through. So we'll be watching. Do we get a big reversal bar, and then do we get confirmation and a follow-through to all of that? We'll be watching these trend lines up by the clouds up here. Again, we broke the trend line on NASDAQ from the August low to the January low. We'll be watching that trend line closely. If we claw our way back above the 200 period, which again, Bitcoin's rallied up towards it, we'll see how it closes. But can Bitcoin get above the 200? If it does, NASDAQ will likely, again, they're both bouncing off, both testing important moving averages, the 50-week moving averages and the trend lines. I think for the S&P 500, again, we had the reversal. We had a failed breakout, as I talked about, on February 19th and 20th. And the 21st, we talked about all of this 3 weeks ago. Look what's happened with that failed breakout. If we recover here, we'll be watching these broken trend lines now to see if we attempt to backtest them. But we're becoming very, very oversold. So again, wouldn't be surprised to see bounce. Stochastics way down here at extremes, holding at extremes, and the MACD is at deep, deep extremes. So I wouldn't be surprised to see an attempted recovery surrounding the horizontal support if we fail to confirm that break on S&P and the rising trend line on NASDAQ in the weekly time frame. Those are the trend lines that are broken that we could rally back towards. See NASDAQ recover. I'm watching this weekly chart. Bitcoin's getting this big rally, having breached this level, couldn't close below it. It's got a possible double bottom. If Bitcoin's rallying back up towards that 200, NASDAQ could do it with these divergences. Bitcoin's got so many bullish signals all over the place. If it plays out and we get a big rally today by the end of the close here, and again, Bitcoin trades around the clock, it's not closed yet, and then on Wednesday, do we see Bitcoin continue the rally, the market follow? We'll be watching what happens. It's testing its 200 period, a 6% rally here. Can NASDAQ recover and test its 200 period? Bitcoin moved to just above horizontal support, this lower trend line right here, possible bull flag pattern, and this rising trend line intersecting with that from the 2023 low. NASDAQ is doing something very similar with the trend line. It is in the daily time frame. Bitcoin also has that in the weekly time frame, testing the 50-week, which is what NASDAQ is doing, forming the bullish diversion. So again, if Bitcoin can get above the 200 and stay above it, we could see the stock market follow Bitcoin's lead. Bitcoin's trying to bounce off the 50-week moving average in the trend line. So is NASDAQ. The RSIs on both of them breached the 50 area. Can they recover off of these trend lines? This is the trend line from the 2023 low for Bitcoin. NASDAQ is at the trend line from the 2022 low. Bitcoin's up 3% for the week so far after going lower and tagging that key level. So do we see that with NASDAQ? NASDAQ dropped below the trend line and the 50. Does it end up closing back above them? Well, let's look at NASDAQ. Let me just bring up Bitcoin one more time here, because again, we're bouncing out both the EMA and the SMA, both of them being the 50 period moving average, the trend line. We could see NASDAQ, which breached this level slightly, we could see it attempt to recover there. Talked about how Bitcoin keeps rebounding off of the 50 EMA over and over. That's this lighter line right here. Over and over, it continues to do it, and we've seen NASDAQ do the same thing. Do we see it right here? NASDAQ could follow Bitcoin's lead. This is the NASDAQ weekly chart, and take a look at this. We've breached the trend line, okay, and we've taken out the 50 period moving average, the EMA, and the simple moving average. And again, just like Bitcoin, it's testing it. Bitcoin is testing those levels and bouncing off of them. NASDAQ has slightly breached those levels, okay? We tested it. We hit it last week at the low last week. I talked about that in the weekend update. But look at right here. Okay, we had the downtrend over here in 2022, and we breached this trend line right here, but we still ended up going to new lows. Now, I'm not saying NASDAQ's going to make new highs, but in 3 weeks ago today, I told you we were a peak, we were going to get a sell-off, broken support level after support level, and again, I have to admit, we've gone lower than I thought. The GDP estimate has rattled the market. Trump's tariffs have rattled the market. We'll be watching to see what happens. Do we get some kind of rebound with the inflation data or not? But we're breaking this level. We'll see, do we close back above it? What if we end up getting a bottoming tail by the end of the week and closing back above the 50 period and above the broken trend line? Again, here we didn't do that, but we still ended up going, and the trend line changed. The trend line changed, and we had it from that peak there to that peak there, and then we broke out and back tested that level or had a throwback to it. So trend lines can change, and could that be the case here? Or do we get a bottoming tail here in the weekly time frame on the NASDAQ weekly chart? Just something to ponder and think through. If NASDAQ follows Bitcoin and gets a big rally, does NVIDIA bottom out at that trend line? We have a little trend line right here from these lows over in here, here on the NASDAQ. So again, we'll be watching, can we get back above the broken trend line? Can we get back above the 50 and end up bouncing off of it rather than breaching it? And again, that's what I wanted to show you here is take a look again, the 50 EMA, and that's a little green line. We bounced off the trend line and the 50 EMA here. We did it over here, right there. Acted as resistance right here and right here. So again, we're here right at that level. Throwing a bit, can we recover? NASDAQ weekly chart here. Now, as we are testing the trend line, and we've dropped below it on NASDAQ, and we are testing the 50-week moving average from the 2022 low. Bitcoin's testing the trend line from the 2023 low. We've dropped, yesterday I told you we were down 13.48%, almost 13.5%. We're down now almost 13.75%, down to 13.72% now from the high. We can do what Bitcoin's doing and recover, and if Bitcoin can get back above the 200, then we'll be watching to see if NASDAQ can do it, and if we can recover. Again, our 50 period and our cloud is up here, but I'll be watching the golden pocket. I'll be watching the Fibonacci retracements, because if we stop making new highs, because we had that failed breakout above the December high, we failed to really be able to clear we got the breakout above that level, but then and I didn't draw that very straight on the doji there. The doji, we got above it, but then we could not get the confirmation of that, and that gave us the sell-off. So if we into recover, we'll be watching the golden pocket. Does the market, does NASDAQ stop making new highs? Does the S&P? It's a risk. Recover, I'll be watching the cloud, and that's right in here in the golden pocket right here. My color changed on me. Let me just use black here. But the 21,000 area, getting back above 21,000, is there 61.8 should this low hold, and we end up rebounding before the week ends here and getting a bottoming tail on the weekly chart, 78.6 Fibonacci at the 21,575 area. So again, that 21,000 to 21,000, just over 500 to 600 is major resistance should we attempt a big recovery. And we could get more good tariff news. When if Canada and the United States end up getting a deal? Keep seeing these tariffs paused or delayed or whatever. If we end up seeing deal reach, the market would really, really like that. Dropped almost 14%, 13.72% from the high. And on the S&P, this is our second trading day below the 200 period moving average. We dipped below it before, but we couldn't close there a couple of times. We dipped below it, got the bottoming tail and rally back up, and then now we get this gap down. And we've had 2 days close trying to take out that key horizontal support area, which again has not been confirmed yet. And if we get back into the trading range, back above horizontal support, then it could be a fake move, a failed move, a flush out, taking out key support, which is often the case. Over here, we took out the high just ever so slightly, but it was a fake out, and I talked about that being a failed breakout there at the peak at 61.47. We had S&P dropped by 10% now. Yesterday it was down 9.5%. Now it's down just over 10%. And again, official correction territory. We're watching. Do we make an attempt to get back above the 200? Again, do we get a Morningstar reversal on NASDAQ and S&P? Do we see Bitcoin continue to try to rally and close strong? And does the stock market follow? Again, look at the Fibonacci retracement. Should we recover? This is an important trend line that broke that we'll be watching, getting a move back towards that. And then we'll also be watching the Fibonacci retracements, the golden pocket between the 61.8 Fibonacci of this entire decline. The golden pocket is at 5,915, okay? And the 78.6 Fibonacci is just above 6,000. So between 5,900, the low 5,900 area, and the low 6,000 area is the golden pocket that we'll be watching. We're likely going to make some kind of attempt to rebound if we can get back above, if horizontal support can hold, and if we can get back above the 200. If we confirm a break below horizontal support, then we may get our emergency cuts out of the Fed if we end up dropping another 10%. The market drops 10%, but like I said, this could be part of the topping process. 2007, we dropped 12%, still went up and made new highs. We could see something like that, and we could still see a divergence develop between NASDAQ and S&P 500. Things to be thinking about and watching, but if this low can hold, we do start a reversal, start seeing momentum signals, and all the momentum's bearish, been bearish right after we turned down right here and confirmed that failed breakout, getting the reversal. Signals have been bearish. I've been talking about the support areas. We haven't been able to see any of the support areas hold, and we even lost the 200 period moving average. If we do see this mark a bottom, we'll be watching for recovery. You confirm the break of horizontal support, then that would be major technical damage for the S&P 500, just like I talked about that we broke the trend line. Remember, I told you we can go back to the trend line and get a bounce. We ended up breaking it. We'll be watching to see if we attempt a recovery here or back above horizontal support, or do we also break that? And if we do, then all bets are off. Get a much, much bigger drop. Again, Bitcoin is recovering. As it looks to be, the market is likely not far behind.